Hello. Welcome back to the Realm of Ideas is Free to All. This is episode 46, Drawing and Copying. Okay, so last week we had a tremendously beautiful program that Julie led about the end of the conclusions of ideas regarding the death of 2D design and the kind of essential aspects of other things that were lost. Read a piece by Borges called The Witness that basically talked about what happens when something disappears, never to return, and its nature. So this week we'll start with the first lines of Whitehead's The Aims of Education, and then finish with a piece from Self Reliance that uh, that comes from Emerson. Um, and interesting both. I mean, I always make fun of Harvard, but I mean, I will admit that the philosophy department at Harvard has been clearly at least America's greatest development of philosophy, but maybe kind of can be in the 20th century and 21st century, maybe the greatest in the world. But again, I mean, I have a lot of friends who have gone through that venerable institution, and maybe there's some other things behind it, but I've always enjoyed kind of making fun. So cultural is activity of thought and receptiveness to beauty and humane feeling. Scraps of information have nothing to do with it. A merely well informed man is the most useless bore on God's earth. What we should aim at producing is men who possess both culture and expert knowledge in some special direction. Their expert knowledge will give them the ground to start from, and their culture will lead them as deep as philosophy and high as art. We have to remember that the valuable intellectual development is self development. So, that I believe leads into this next piece that I'll read, 2 chapters, and it kind of deals with character. And character is very much a big part of what we're going to talk about this evening. So, there is a time in every man's education, again, right? And again, best education is all valuable education is self-education. There is a time in every man's education where he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, that he must take himself for better, for worse, as his portion. That though the wide universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him but through his toil bestowed on that plot of ground which is given to him to till, meaning yourself. The power which resides in him is not in nature and none, but he knows that which what that is which he can do. Nor does he know until he has tried. Not for nothing, one face, one character, one fact makes much impression on him, and another none. This sculpture is the memory, it not without pre-established harmony. The eye was placed where one ray should fall, that it might testify to that particular ray. We but half express ourselves and are ashamed to that divine idea which each of us represents. It may be safely trusted as proportionate and of good issues, so it be faithfully imparted. But God will not have his work made manifest by cowards. A man is relieved and gay when he has put his heart into his work and done his best. But what he has said or done otherwise shall give him no peace. It is deliverance which does not deliver. In the attempt his genius desert him, no muse befriends, no invention, no hope. You are, as Ortega says, yourself in your circumstance. And that goes not just for yourself, but that entity which you find yourself embedded in. Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. Accept the place the divine providence has found for you, the society of your contemporaries, the connection of events. Great men have always done so. and confided themselves childlike to the genius of their age, betraying their perception that the absolutely trustworthy was seated at their heart, working through their hands, predominating in all their being. And we are now men and must accept in the highest mind the same transcendent destiny. And not minors and invalids in a protected corner, not cowards fleeing before revolution, not but guides, redeemers, and benefactors, obeying the almighty effort and advancing on chaos and the dark. That man knew how to write, bro. It fires me up. Every time I read Self-Reliance, it just fires me up. You need to find that place which is you, right? And find that genius that is only you. That is a kind of core element of what we'll be talking about today. The difference between drawing, which is, I think, one of the most exalted and venerable activities, vocations one can engage in, and copying, which has a value. I will say that an expertly done copy, has merit, but it basically defies all those things which I've just spoken about. It basically goes in the wrong direction completely and utterly. So, given that as our opening, we will now go to the best part of the program, the part that everyone tunes in to see. And since we've been doing it, the reason why we've kind of started to have people being here and watching is what's new in Julie. There's Julie.
I'm Julie.
It's still birthday week because Julie
It is
was
birthday week.
Yeah,
I was thwarted.
Yeah, but we persevered. We persevered. Thrice. Exactly. And let me say one last thing because we have a very loyal follower, one of our friends who has basically always been there since the beginning, and he is remembered, and he is this is from Mr. Spock says 7654. Hey, great as always. Green Goblin in the Hollywood movie had to be reinvented because it was felt his high level of technical sophistication as an image would be considered too nightmarish, so they made him more ridiculous as image for easier, wider audience consumption. And I think that's a warning and a praise. I see it as a praise in the fact that in this circumstance, we want only to talk about what is of consequence to us. And we will never, we hopefully will never waver from that. We will basically stay true to the fact that the ideas, the things that are constant. Well, you just keep an eye on me.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, important words to keep in mind. Thank you, Mr. Spock says. And let's look forward to kind of like
live long and prosper.
Spock, help me, Spock. That was the only Star Trek as far as I was concerned. Yeah, it's there was like the one with that woman, like, oh, my hand, Mr. Six-Pack, my hand is on my hips.
Terrible. That was the brutal. Awful Voyager, which you couldn't even watch.
That was
the humor
so weak.
Was Vulcan, science officer was really boring. A captain who was strident and had no depth. Anyway,
and then they had the guy, was it Captain Picard? And they had that guy number 2.
Like the Next Generation.
It was just so.
Did you want to do that?
Yeah, no, I do. Yeah. I just thought that, there was only one true Star Trek, and it basically was that
Trouble with Tribbles.
Oh yes,
But I did like the Trouble with Tribbles crossover Deep Space Nine episode.
It did?
Yeah, you should see that. It's a CGI masterpiece.
Yeah. The one thing I could never understand was I never could figure out why the one day, and I don't hate it. It's not worth being hated. Yeah. Star Wars was worthless as my estimation.
Not a Star Wars
fan. But the thing is, I have to give Star Wars fans credit for something over Star Trek fans. They do eventually move out of their parents' basements. And maybe. It's no, at least some of them get jobs, not real jobs, but at least they get jobs, as opposed to like the Star Trek fans who live in their parents' basement and just go to conventions and
usually at Tower Records, and then when it closed,
Tower went out, yeah.
they went back to their parents' basement.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So what's new in Julie, my loved one?
Well, would you be so kind as to be my easel and hold up my drawing?
Yes, Pete.
Are your hands dry?
Yes.
You don't have T fingers?
No.
Or Camellia sinensis thumbs?
That's funny.
Yes. So is there too much glare, or is everyone able to see that? I think that might be good. Okay, so this is my drawing, almost complete, and a shout out to our newest Art Science Complex YouTube channel subscriber who came by at the Met earlier this evening with his friend and showed great interest in my drawing, and I explained the concept, and I promised him, as we would be, talking about the underlying science here, which is fascinating. The subject is kleptoplasty. And for those of you who don't know what kleptoplasty is, it is an animal, the only one that I know of that does it, who steals chloroplasts from plants in their immediate vicinity, which is the ocean. So this is, these are two different species of the lettuce sea slug that looks like Swiss chard or curly endive or romaine, but not iceberg, which has really no distinguishing architecture. I'll continue to hold it up. I thought it might be interesting.
No, okay.
No, because if I was gonna.
Okay, I didn't know if you were going to point to it or not.
Yeah. Okay. So the area up here, right there, is actually called a kleptosome, and that I finished today. Thank you for the close-up. That is an organ that the lettuce sea slug grew in response to its immediate needs. So this is rapid evolution, folks. This is growing an organ to store the stolen the actual chloroplasts, the photosynthesizing organelles from the algae, which it feeds on, but it doesn't just eat the algae, which would mean it has a finite source of food. This is not just clever, it's a brilliant strategy for survival in what is often a really dangerous environment that can shift at any moment, and you could lose your food source. So what this incredible animal has done is it stores these stolen, and it siphons them off like a crazy straw. I mean, it actually sucks the chloroplasts out of the algae into a series of venous-type structures, and then stores them not just for days or weeks, but even months in this wonderful round organ that, as you see, is clustered with numerous, thank you, Puddle, numerous chloroplasts. And what I've done is I have framed it in the gilded frame that is actually in this British Necessaire, which is the container here, which, as you can see, is an oblong container. I'll bring it up now for the detail. It is enamel with gold, and it's a beautiful piece. It's about it's very, very small, 2.5 inches by about 4.5 or 5 inches. It comes undone and has these tools, which you can see here, which I have actually morphed with the storage venous structure of the kleptoplasty as basically the tools of form and function. So these are the tools of its survival. So I've taken the tools of the Necessaire. Would you like to explain?
Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What a Necessaire is? It's basically like a Swiss Army knife for the well-heeled traveler. It's everything that a traveler needs. There are sewing implements, drafting tools, architecture tools, writing tools, and an inkwell, sewing tools, knives and scissors and combs, and it's quite astonishing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Would you like to ask a question or add to that?
No, I mean, I've been following along. So,
Sure,
that's where we are. So what's left to do?
Well, what is left to do is I sketched it in, didn't have time because I ran out of time, to basically articulate this second lettuce C slug. The first one here is not quite done either, but what I'm going to do is have the tail end of the lettuce slug, which is over here, exist in space as almost, I'd say, a sculptural flying pennant, and then have its surface, which is very ribbon-like, very, very coiled. It actually has large holes that go right through to the ocean. It's a very morphic creature. Mm-hmm. It's a very delicate, it's transparent in some areas, it's translucent in other areas. And I'm going to have it blend with the enameled surface and then rise off the surface, which I've drawn in here, and attain its full three. I'm never used to this where you point in one side and it's the other, where it will attain its, am I holding that straight? Three-dimensionality. Thanks. Sorry, it's a little hard to hold it and talk. So I will be making this area more three-dimensional. I just sketched in, but it does have these delicate lavender rims. It is basically a writhing, dancing ruffle of a Spanish flamenco dancer, which it moves like it kind of, it is very graceful and it undulates.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we look forward to seeing that finished next week. All right. What else is going on, Julie?
Well, I believe I am pretty much finished with the underdrawing of my current science painting, which is entitled Gilded Terrors of a Court Jester. Baron Schmiedel's mice run fear extinction experiments. And the very interesting thing there is the huge controversy and upheaval in neuropsychiatry and psychology about the very idea, the validity, whether fear extinction even exists and is possible. And many people wrote papers saying they were quite sure and they knew it was, when it turns out it's really not.
That brings up an interesting point. Is like, I think one of the things that has become very troubling to me, and that kind of, I guess ever since I've been studying architecture and been in any relationship to any kind of universities, one of the first things I became aware of in academic life was the reproducibility crisis. And, the fact that for the most part, most papers were never duplicated. So therefore the findings were always suspect. And it got to the point where not only was that problem never addressed, it was ignored. And in a time now with so much anecdotal information being spewed, you just get to yourself where, like, someone say, well, the studies have shown, it's like, one study has shown something that was never basically verified anywhere else. So, for all intents and purposes, it might as well just be kind of wild speculation.
And was it even a well-designed study?
Well, whatever. Yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah. But the point is, like,
problem.
One of the things that really needs to happen is if you can't corroborate, the information from other things, you have to eventually kind of say to yourself, like, well, I don't know, man, we don't really know the value of this. science is a beautiful thing. The investigation of using experiments to be able to kind of strengthen our understanding of ourselves and of the universe is an incredibly beautiful thing. And using rational means to do that is probably the greatest discovery and the greatest decision, that we've made in terms of how we kind of should move ourselves forward. But at the same time, we have to be very, very cognizant of the fact that, like, we can't come to say that just because a situation has looked promising, that it is a fact. And I think we have to kind of, like, realize that just like justice, science takes a while till it kind of really gets to the point where we can really feel as if we're really standing on firm ground. So, that's one of the things that I think happens. I mean, in fact, that's one of the things I love about it, is the fact that, like, a lot of times that, you kind of get to the point where it's kind of something that's really a kind of labor of love, you kind of, and I think it's good when it's seen that way, because I think that one really enters into it to kind of get a better, as Whitehead says, to get a better, deeper understanding of not just the thing itself, but yourself as well. So I think science is a great way in which one can kind of pursue that investigation outwards as well as inwards.
A quick addendum.
Yes.
I might want to cover that now, just so it doesn't spill on your book. So, what is interesting is something that Bruce had said, which is we look to science and use science as a tool for investigations, for discovery, for research, but there is a new problem that wasn't a huge problem prior, but kind of has been coming up recently. Conflict of interest. And conflict of interest has undermined an awful lot of scientific studies because most of the funding has been pulled. And now, because of Trump and other circumstances, the funding has just been pulled, like, basically pulling a rug out from under somebody, and all their furniture tumbles onto the floor. Many of the scientific studies that are highly touted, that are quoted by other scientists, that are used as the basis, as the foundation for lots of other scientific work, are funded by special interest groups who have quite a vested interest in the outcome, and they are only funding studies that show information that they want them to show. And if the result, it's a really big
no,
thing.
but that's not a new thing.
It's not a new thing.
It's been going on forever. I mean, there's always been, there have been plenty of people who have been basically, when like the milk industry and the beef industry, I mean, they go back to the 60s and the 70s when the smoking industry, basically funded research.
Lobbyists, what I'm saying is, you kind of knew about it then. The special interest, conflict of interest now is being buried, like layers and layers underground, where you have to dig for it if it's there. So if it's right out there, and that there are lobbyists who are trying to say that cigarette smoking is a good thing, which is absolutely not, and it never has been. This is where you are reading a study and you have to hunt and search, like for the wreck of the Titanic, if you want to find out if there are special interests driving it.
Well, I mean, and I agree. And I think a lot of that. I agree. And I think that's something I would want to say something related to, is that one of the things I find is that when there was little information available, prior to the digital age, it was usually fairly reasonable and vetted kind of competently, and you kind of like didn't have to. It's always good to be judgmental. It's always good to have the ability to discern fact from fiction and be able to figure these things out for yourself. But there was a sense where the people who put these things together had a sense of responsibility and a sense of obligation, that they weren't basically putting their own needs and desires first.
Mm.
They basically wanted to have the information as concise and as open and clear as possible. But that's no longer the case. I mean, everyone seems to be moving from their own, like you said, their own self-interest. And I mean, that's not Trump. I mean, that's basically the digital age. I mean, Trump is himself a person who he's driven by his agenda. He's like a lot of other people, but I think this idea where you can't trust anything anymore and you have to kind of go and really search. Sure. But the other thing is the depth of the data labyrinth is such that it can be constructed where and I find this often, is if I want to look for information that should be available, it seems almost impossible to find. And in fact, what kind of information? Well, here's the thing. I mean, one of the things I've been hearing in the last 2 or 3 years out of librarians has been all about all the banned books. And, having spent 5 months in the Soviet Union in 1990, when it was still the Soviet Union, one of the things that many of my students, kind of like once they got to be very close to me, would do was they would show me, as the world was starting to open up, they would show me the places where their parents or grandparents had actually had false floors, false walls, false panels, that basically was where they hid the subversive reading materials. And these things were passed incredibly secretly because the reality was, you ban a book in America, it just boosts sales at Amazon. You ban a book in the Soviet Union and get found with it, you could disappear and never be heard from again. So I looked up, punishments of, having banned reading materials in China and the Soviet Union. It was impossible to find what the punishments are. No, but the thing is, that's just it. That's something that we know.
It's usually death.
It was usually death, imprisonment, or worse. But it's like, but that's the thing, is that now, things that we should have access to. I mean, I know because these people said
being forced to attend a Dolly Parton concert,
probably, or worse, monster trucks, but or Sound of Music. That's pretty cruel. Right. That's inhuman.
As a segue into our topic.
So basically, the reality was, that these were places where people actually cared so much about ideas, which is what this program is about, that they actually risked death. They were actually risked imprisonment, not the idea of kind of like, a little bit of kind of like, notoriety, in order to have access to certain things. So that's what brings us to our topic. So our topic is the difference between drawing and copying. And this is this is something that I've talked about a lot at the Metropolitan. We have our kind of like our drawing circle and our drawing friends, many of which, I kind of like, sometimes I see them every week. Sometimes I don't see them for months, but we all know who we are and we kind of enjoy each other's company. So, we were fortunate. We had, as our usual Friday, Saturday night, we had our little meeting after, and we kind of like all had our little engagement. But I would say, as a draftsman, I draw. I don't copy, and I never will copy. And, basically for me, drawing is the essence of thinking visually. And copying is basically something that, like I said, I will respect, an expertly done, but I believe that it is something that has a limited value. You want to add something now to go into more detail?
Sure, I can say why it does have a limit, unless you'd like to go into that.
No, I'll go into it in a minute, but I just wanted to give a basic, beginning.
Sure. I think that in the case of classic workshop structures, meaning workshop of Rembrandt, workshop of Velázquez, workshop of Van Dyck, many of the Dutch masters, Jan de Heem, had workshops of students, of acolytes who produced work that came out of that studio in the manner of Van Dyck or Jan de Heem. and their students went on to create many works of their own, although their works were certainly signed by Van Dyck. You can always tell, or at least I can tell, which part of a painting was painted by Rembrandt, which part was likely painted by his students. I usually score pretty high on that.
Yeah, that's just funny. One of the things we've enjoyed, spending, kind of better part of 4 decades at the Metropolitan Museum of Art on a regular basis, is that, when a new piece kind of emerges, especially in certain places, and someone would say, we've watched things go from, say, for an example, Rembrandt, School of Rembrandt, and then basically disappears because it was like, it was
student of Rembrandt.
Right, exactly. Like, and then it was like, it wasn't, it was like Freddie Rembrandt or Kevin Rembrandt or something.
And in certain cases, it's been an outright forgery, not from their student or their school.
Exactly.
But the thing that I quickly wanted to say about that is this was not plagiarism like plagiarism exists now. These workshops were set up, and it was very widely known to all art collectors, to people of the day, to people in the Netherlands, that they were getting a piece that was worked on by several hands or many hands. Right. Meaning they were not trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the buyer. That was not what it was about. They were learning from the master. Now you have people that are literally copying other people's work and hijacking other people's original ideas because they have none of their own, and trying to pass off other people's ideas, drawings, paintings, writing, recipes, musical compositions as their own. And that, I think, is heinous.
Yeah. And also the other thing is, like, if indeed, like someone who was in the School of Rembrandt had done a painting of his own. I mean, one of my, I think for me, the Flink is probably the greatest Rembrandt student. In fact, I believe that his individual works, some of them are just absolutely magnificent. There's a piece that's there's a piece that sits in the room, kind of like to the left of the self-portrait of a Trony. And I think it's a magnificent painting. One of the
best paintings.
It's one of the exactly. Yeah. But the point is, in order to do a copy, right, of a great master's work, in this case, right, like I said, an expertly done copy is in itself something that has to be given credit.
Absolutely.
Has to be, because it's only a handful of people
who can do it.
Exactly.
Like that, yeah.
As opposed to, like, the kind of like
make a copy of like a Keith Haring doodle.
Exactly.
Or a Kostami doodle.
Or even worse, the fact that people kind of like are plagiarizing absolute drivel.
That's what I mean.
The academic environment is just full of people who've never had an original thought. And the thing is, I think one of the things, and I'm going to ask you to explain the thing about the Japanese thing with inability to write.
Oh, sure.
In that these people are so incapable of any kind of formulation that the stuff that they're copying and plagiarizing is almost as bad as the shit that they make themselves. It's like when you have no ability to make any formulations, not only will you make shit, you're likely to copy the most inane, nonsensical
stuff.
Exactly, because you have no critical acumen. So the idea is, and I think one of the reasons why indoctrination is so capable of being, kind of created today is nobody has the ability to understand just how much this stuff is just pure shit. And it's like, you think, wow, I mean, if I'm going to copy something, I'm going to copy something of consequence. It's like, honestly,
you can discern what is of consequence.
Exactly.
That's kind of
and it's
point.
like, oh my God. And okay, so this takes us to the idea. Now, what's to me what the major difference is?
Okay?
I don't know. Yeah, just it's like this is a wind advisory.
Oh, all right.
To me, what I think is the basic difference between a drawing and a copy. And again, like a lot of times what'll happen is I'll work from pieces at the Met, and people will kind of like, kind of see and appreciate the work that I'm doing. But one of the things that ultimately is important is that what I will do is that I don't look for the ability to create just simply a similarity or a resemblance between what I'm drawing and the piece that I'm working from. I'm looking to get what I would say is what I decide is the most intrinsic and indispensable. So a resemblance or a likeness is something that is like just a similarity. So you can see a kind of link between two things. And this idea that you kind of can't tell if it's a real apple or a drawing of an apple is a great sleight of hand kind of trick. But the point is, there's a dependence on the copy of having to have something that it's a copy of. Right? It's not an independent investigation. It basically needs the basic
courage.
It does. It's a kind of a gutless thing.
Yeah.
But the point is, when you're dealing with something that you're looking for something at its most intrinsic and indispensable, you're looking for something that's shared between your original work and that thing from which it comes. Because the reality is, it's an independent judgment to decide what's intrinsic and indispensable, because it may be that the piece that you're working from, because it had another author, had a different approach or had a different essence. To me, the greatest compliment that I can receive is when someone says, I believe you've gotten to a deeper understanding of the person who was the sitter or the object that you're delineated than was the original author of the piece from which you're studying. To me, that is an incredibly great compliment. And when I have to say, it's a tremendous satisfaction to me when someone I've never met will make that the statement they make to me, because it vindicates for me that it's very possible that my goal, which that is, has been at least to a certain degree achieved, because it's recognizable to a person I've never given any indication to that that's my goal.
Yes, they obviously see it because it's there.
Yeah, but again, like if the only thing that a person says to you turns out to be that which you feel is the most valuable and commendable investigation by which you could conduct yourself, you have to feel it's like, well, it may be marvelous. Yeah, exactly, because you kind of think, oh, they didn't know that was what I would have hoped one day someone would say.
Right.
So I think in that case, there's something individual in that. Yeah. Well, the question is like, how would you sense to you when you do something, because you work differently. You kind of collage and metaphor in terms of the fact that your drawings are basically composites of things that can exist in your imagination, as well as, things that are kind of superimposed on things that exist. Like the piece you just showed us.
Yes, I would say I not to get into semantics, but only because when people hear collage, they think taking existing magazine images, newspaper images, and sticking them down and making something out of it. That's not original work. I hybridize. I do something extremely different. I combine things not in a random or decorative fashion, but I combine things to illustrate concepts, to visualize new research that I read about in the science journals, to get across, I think, some very beautiful, very rarefied ideas that people otherwise would not know about. And I use the objects at the Met. I never copy work at the Met. I don't copy work at all.
Don't know.
Okay. And the point is, I don't think it's terrible for somebody just starting out who might find a lot of substance. Oh, I don't know if you want sorry. Okay. I'm not sure. It might be really great with somebody who's just starting out, who feels that they might want to look to the masters, to make a copy. But I take the objects and the artifacts, a lot of them in the Asian wings, all of which are closed now for reinstallation, which is rather hard. And I use them as metaphors to explain, as one idea substituting for another unpredictable idea, as metaphors to stand in for certain ideas, certain functions, certain structures in the sciences, quite specifically.
Right. And I think that makes sense because the reality is that in the case where there's like a common or shared essence, right? These are not separate things. I mean, what happens is, in the copy, the piece is dependent on the original existing. Whereas the thing is, there's a desire to have the piece from which you're working recognizable, but it's recognizable more for its distancing from it than from its similarities. And the similarity is a kind of broad kind of sense where there's really nothing specific. It's like, yeah, it looks like that, but there's nothing really deep and consequential. I mean, for me, what is important is to kind of find, like I said, even something deeper than what the original artist might have been able to see, but maybe is still possible being gleaned by looking through his eyes at the piece back to the original sitter or manufacturer of the object, to see something that maybe was missed or maybe not deep enough. I think that one of the things that's difficult for people to comprehend is once someone crafts an object, that object no longer belongs to them. So this kind of cowardly dependence on this kind of homage to the original author is, I think, kind of sheepish and cowardly. Whereas, for the individual to kind of take the piece and use it to craft or use it to go deeper, to understand and investigate maybe something that wasn't seen or understood, that to me is the thing that kind of generates something that could have an additional or deeper consequence, right? Which I think is the thing that you're basically illustrating. This is just something you obviously pay homage to because you revere it, but at the same time, you kind of still look to the same way as which someone says, hey, your original paper where you basically wrote these ideas, one of the things that you may not have understood was in doing this, you laid out the possibility of that. And I think that's the kind of thing that I feel that, maybe people in the scientific world understand it better than people in the artistic world. Because I think there's still this idea. It's like, I'm the only one who can basically interpret it because I'm the person who created it. So therefore it's mine. I mean, one of the things that's interesting is like, I learned this from, Einstein's papers in 1905, people were able to take the ideas that he had laid down, especially in terms of the quantum world, and take them further than he believed they had a right to be taken or were capable of being taken. So in fact, like, he ended up kind of seeing and even kind of having a certain, I don't know, animosity maybe is a strong word, a certain kind of reservation of some of the discoveries that he had actually laid the groundwork for. So I think in this case, that's the same thing when one's a draftsman, when someone draws, is that those things that you create become simply a thing unto itself, and it has a life of its own. A copy will always be dependent on the thing that it's a copy of. And if it has a value, it has a value when it can separate itself from that. But as long as it's dependent, it will never really have its independent. It'll never really have a life of its own. So anyway.
Can I'll
no,
add to that.
No.
Anyway.
No. No.
A copy.
No. Ow.
That was fun.
That was fun.
A copy. That was a lot of fun.
Ow.
A copy is always tethered, and that is the right word. It is a word that has in its realm of definitions tied to, chained to, forever bonded to. It cannot fly off or escape or create a life of its own. That is the ball and chain of the copy.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe that the copy has a deep indebtedness to the original that it can never break free of, which hinders its ability to become other, and which I will segue to use an object as a springboard for imagination,
Mm-hmm.
which is what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm proposing new things. That is what is joyful, wonderful, critical, vital about not just copying. If you have your own ideas, manifest those ideas, because I really don't think that people who spend their entire lives or careers, whether they're amateurs or they're hobbyists or professionals, ever progress beyond the copy if that's all they choose to do.
Yeah, actually, you've spoken about the idea of, I mean, again, since you worked with images in design,
A lot,
like the fact that, like, in fact, it, as time goes on, as you copy more and more, you get further and further away from the essence. You get further and further away from actually finding anything of value. And in fact, I think the term that that was used in the Emerson piece, was character. For me, everything expresses a character, and that character is basically the illustration of its essence. And I find that the ability to go as deep, because I would say that not only do I see the fact that, as you said, you kind of do these things and you take these things as a springboard in order to generate, but also in my case, not only do I do that, but I also see the possibility of taking that springboard to go deeper into the understanding of the original thing itself.
Yes,
which to me, gives us a better understanding of the things around us, because the whole pursuit, right, is a deeper insight into the things around us.
Well, like, again, you aren't making copies, you are igniting the interior life of that individual when you do one of your portrait busts, for example. You aren't making a poster of that. I mean, there are people, I won't say who, that are very good. They're very good drafts people. They draw at the Met, but they are copyists. They are making a copy of every shadow, every line, and it looks like a very skilled poster or a postcard, but they're not making or creating original work. They're proposing nothing.
Right.
They are not illuminating anything. They are not, see, the idea is you're writing a new narrative by creating original work, and not just one. Character study after character study of objects that were never deemed worthy of character. And I will explain that. When I'm drawing an object, which is mostly what I do, they have as much interior life, history, and existence over time as any human would. At least they do to me.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the things that happens, I mean, like, what happens is, when you have a Xerox that's copied and copied and copied, and you use the Xerox machine analogy, it's what happens is those slight deviations kind of eat away at the character. And you can have a copy that still looks seemingly resemblance, but in fact the character is completely missing. So you can actually do something that has a keen resemblance and is expert, but misses completely the essence of the piece. And I think one of the things that the 20th, one of the things that was always at the height of art and always at the forefront of real art, especially in the 20th century, was the idea that one didn't have to draw everything that one saw, just what was essential. And that is an incredibly difficult thing to do. In fact, you remember when you gave your lecture at the Museum of Natural History, you were kind of constantly like being told by people who had been illustrating bugs for 40 years.
Yeah, this was really funny.
That abdomen only has 7 hairs. You have 8.
Oh yeah, I had battles
like,
with entomologists. I was working
and it's
inside their department.
Yes, it's true. But I mean, in this case, like the idea is not to kind of like, investigate the correctness, but the essence. And sometimes, one of the things that I found,
drawing an encyclopedia.
In fact, I learned this from a student of mine, by seeing this, was that often, and this is the kind of the things that happens, is that sometimes in order to get at the essence, you need to go away from the likeness. And in fact, the more you deviate from the likeness, the more you may get at the essence. Now, it sounds kind of counterintuitive and kind of like paradoxical, but I've seen that be the case. And if I look at the great works of the 20th century in art, I find that often is what we're seeing, is that the things that were kind of misplaced or kind of taken apart was because what we're doing is making meaningful abstractions. We're kind of making something that kind of illustrates a concept about an essence. It's not ever going to be the essence itself, because that's not accessible to us, right? If the object sits there in order to be understood, but we can never have complete perspectival understanding of every point of view of any particular object. It's never going to be the case. So anyway, I think that idea of a shared essence of investigation between anything that exists and anything that basically is drawn as a result of creating something that then becomes a new object in the world, as opposed to something that's dependent on the existing object that has already existed, is the difference that we kind of, I think, is very important to understand. And again, it's not a judgment in terms of quality or in terms of ability. It's just basically a difference. One I consider art, and I think the other one I would consider, I don't know, I guess illustration or something. Or what would you consider copying?
No, it's
not art.
Illustration, which I think you can produce highly original works. Arthur Rackham was not a copyist.
No, but I'm saying, like, what yeah, so what is copying? I mean, like, what is it? I mean, it's like I said, it's not draftsman. I mean, it's an exercise in draftsmanship, but it's not in itself. It doesn't create art.
Tell you.
Yeah, no, that's what I was asking.
It's remedial, and it is workmanlike. It's not a creative process. It's an imitative process.
Right, but it can have creative essence by accident, but as an exercise, it really doesn't. It's like, I guess, playing scales.
Yeah, it's an exercise.
It's an exercise. I mean, it's an exercise.
Consider it an etude. It's the etude of classical.
True,
music.
But an etude can be a composition of actual consequence, right? But I mean, again, like, it's an exercise.
Yeah.
It's an exercise, but and if it creates anything of artistic consequence, it creates it as a default rather than by its intention. It's by its ambition.
I'd like to bring up a quick term.
Yeah, sure.
Quantitative imagination. So quantitative imagination is, I define it, my particular term, actually. I've not heard it said anywhere else.
Quantitative imagination. I just said it. How?
I get swatted. Would you like some tea? Anyway, quantitative, or maybe you've had quite enough tea.
Maybe you've had enough. A little overbear.
You're overbear.
You're overbear.
Anyway.
You're legless.
You're legless.
You're legless.
Don't touch my pappardelle.
Okay.
Anyway, quantitative imagination, I believe, can only be applied to the scaffold of original work. And I will make this very, very clear. When one is copying and in the midst of performing an exercise, which has a value at certain junctures in one's development artistically, although I have to be honest, and I will say this, I never, ever copied anything, ever. When I was 5, I never copied. When I was in grade school, I never copied. I was never interested in imitating, copying, or duplicating other people's ideas or other people's work. I'm definitely in the minority there. What I think has a value vast is quantitative imagination. And that is a scaffold that can only be built upon an original composition, an original idea, an original drawing, an original painting.
Perfect. So on the 30th of November, the Sunday after Thanksgiving, episode 53 is quantitative imagination. And let me build on that, because we talked about the individual piece,
but we never talked about
we never talked about the institutional issue. And we had an example of an individual we both knew who basically fell into one of the traps that seems to befall a lot of academic art and architecture training, which is a kind of like a slobberingly kind of like slavish kind of derivative nature of kind of, I don't know, doing stuff that looks like your teacher, like,
it's called sucking up.
Yeah, well, it is, isn't it? But again, I mean, what was interesting was this person, because of his devotion to slobbering nature, he was able in one institution to be incredibly successful. But then when he transferred to Cooper, where it was prized to be highly individualistic and not kind of slavishly derivative, he really kind of was exposed as incapable of original ideas and original thinking. So I look forward to this, because that idea of quantitative imagination is, I think, something that really does talk about that same thing, is that, rather than kind of like making these kind of like, insipid pastiches of the work of your critic or your teacher,
which all have a terminus point. That's
right, exactly, because
the opposite of quantitative imagination.
Because it's dependent on the work of the individual who you're slavishly kind of like sucking up to. But again, so many of our institutions, because of the frailty of the egos and the lack of talent of these people, they're kind of like too insecure to allow people to kind of voice their own independent imagination. Exactly.
Them out.
So, and in fact, we talked about this with some of our friends in terms of music, is that, someone can be technically very proficient, but the point is, like, anybody who kind of starts to kind of talk about the idea of individual kind of interpretation, often kind of gets their hand slapped or worse, in terms of the fact that it's like, that's not your, no, bad girl, no, bad boy, don't, no, stop that, put that down.
They take the newspaper and swap them on the nose.
Exactly. And I think that's the kind of thing that I think is that not only is this a case of an individual, it's also something that's becoming institutionalized and quite prominently in a situation where I believe that the techniques and the abilities of very profound, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, individuals with talent, as they're driven, stop getting the benefit. And in fact, let me quickly read this piece that I wrote the other day.
Yeah, I would read that.
Okay, yeah.
Take your time.
Let me find it. Okay. Okay.
It's over there.
2 pieces, yes. The desired musicians to compose in an emerging desire and should be encouraged. The management of the business of classical music is currently suffocating the curiosity of musicians to generate music. I believe that so many musicians are creatively frustrated as they are not being offered enough great new music to satisfy them. They are looking to generate it themselves, and the improvisational action is their attempt to get at that new music. It is very similar in architecture, as I see a direct parallel to the late 19th century in painting, when there were tremendously technically brilliant individuals whose desires overwhelmed that which they were offered by the limited thinking of the institutions producing artists. Okay, so that's
beautifully
it.
Said.
Thank you, my loved one.
You're welcome.
The realm of ideas is free to all, and it's to the benefit of all for us to maintain this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.